Welcome to episode 3 of Paul's Pen, where we're taking a look at the book of 1 Timothy. This week's looks a little bit different. We're having more of a conversation style as opposed to you getting a glimpse into the very accurate, amazing acting of Paul and Timothy for the last couple weeks.
Yeah, we're hardly acting when we do it. It's just living the whole thing.
It's just natural.
But no, definitely, this is going to feel a little different. Nick, it's a letter that Paul's writing, and in any kind of a letter, I think he had a plan when he started. And so when you're looking at the first chapter, what are some of the main points that Paul hit that are going to be carrying over?
Absolutely. I think the first thing that's a thread throughout all of chapter 1 is the idea of faith and the importance of faith and how that plays an impact in our life. The second thing is the idea that Jesus came to reclaim all people, and Paul uses his own story and then the example of Hymenaeus and Alexander and how he knows that God can do the same thing that he did for Paul with Hymenaeus and Alexander. And
then chapter 2, then, he continues on with that, and he starts using different kinds of word, just talking about, he's going to mention some things that I would look at as what happens in a worship setting. And then he just talks about how God wants all people to be saved, all people to come to knowledge and truth. There's one God. He's really hitting the idea God comes for all of us. Mm-hmm. We've got Jesus and the ransom for all people. There's this idea in the old world here, we've got the Jews and the Gentiles. Mm-hmm. But Paul's not acting like there's this huge difference there in God's mind, yes?
Right, yeah, absolutely. I think Paul is 100% saying the gospel, the saving grace of Jesus is for both the Jews and the Gentiles. It's not for one group exclusively. I mean, Paul makes that very clear in more than just 1 Timothy. It seems like about every letter that he writes, he's alluding to that concept somehow. And so here he's talking to the church in Ephesus about how he's a teacher of the Gentiles in faith and truth. And so this salvation, this reclaiming that Jesus is doing is for all people.
And it is a theme in all his letters. And as he gets that point across, I think in the background in his day there, you've got the Jewish Christians who are fleeing from Judea and they're going into the Greek cities, and so that would be Ephesus would be one of those Greek cities. And in that Greek city, there's a Gentile Christian church, and a lot of these Jewish Christians will join that church. And so I think for Paul, he's trying to make sure the clash of cultures doesn't take over from what it is we're supposed to be doing as Christians, which again in our setting it's the same kind of thing. Yes, we would still have clash of cultures.
I mean, even in generations, your generation's culture is much different than my generation's culture. And so for us today, how is the church called to unify the different cultures? How can we worship together in unity or learn together in unity, even despite cultural differences? And so that's what Paul is doing here, is he's saying, you're going to have two cultures in the same church. How can you be unified together? And uses the example of the women who are adorning themselves
exactly
with all sorts of fancy stuff, where the Jewish women, they would have been taught from the very beginning, you shouldn't be doing this. And so he's working to mesh the two cultures together.
Yeah, and then in the worship setting, again, you've got Jewish women who are used to not talking and things of that nature. Gentile women, they owned businesses, they talked freely, and so they're talking in the church. And I think Paul is trying to get the two cultures not to clash, trying to help Timothy and the Gentile women know what to expect and how they work together. And it's interesting then, he even brings up Adam and Eve. I was going to the bottom of the passage here in chapter 2. He brings up Adam and Eve, and Adam was formed first, and Adam wasn't deceived, but Eve was. And he's talking about a biblical story that for the Jewish Christians, they grew up with this, they memorized it.
Right.
But the Gentile Christians, they don't know this story, and I think he's reminding them of that. There's a difference between the knowledge of Old Testament scriptures for sure, but a difference then too of understanding what does it look like to follow God from the Jewish perspective, and what does it look like to follow God from the Gentile perspective, and Paul's trying to mesh them together so that it makes sense for everybody.
Yeah. I think another thing that we can kind of pull from this as we're looking to apply this to our own lives today, the idea of inner beauty. The Gentile women were looking for beauty on the outside, and this applies to men just as much as it does women. For men, we might not worry as much about how we look, but more about what we do and
definitely
define ourselves by the accomplishments.
Our identity gets wrapped up in that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so we kind of ask the question, where do we seek validation? Do we seek validation from people and the things that we do and the way that we look? Or do we seek validation from God and the faith that we have? And I think God sees inner beauty in us through our faith.
No, definitely. And are we paying attention to what's going inside with our faith and our relationship with God? Or are we so consumed with the outside world and our outside appearance or what we're doing in life that we're not paying attention to that? And I think Paul definitely brings that up. So, I think there's good application for us today. I think it's important to understand what he's talking about here, but there's a lot we can learn from this passage about how we live our lives and how we pay attention to the calling that God has on us as individuals and as a church body.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, thank you for joining in our conversation today. We hope that you can take some of this application and just these tidbits that we gave you, apply it to your life, and tune in on Sunday for a lot more where Carl will dig into this passage a lot deeper and give you even more ways to apply that to your life. So we hope you join us on Sunday for that message.
Okay, take care.
Yeah, I think for us, just that idea of shoot. Hey there, welcome to episode 3 of Paul's Pen, where we're looking through 1 Timothy. This is take 17.
I wasn't at fault the first 15.